Vice President of Television Networks Distribution for the CBS Corporation. During his time here, CBS has successfully increased the distribution reach of CBS networks, implemented a strategy for distribution on emerging digital platforms, and not insignificantly has exceeded all distribution revenue goals each year. Mickey attended Harvard on a full U.S. Army ROTC scholarship, began his career after graduating from Notre Dame Law School, served as an active duty officer and attorney in the Judge Advocate General's Corps. In addition to his time with the JAG Corps, he's been a federal criminal prosecutor and a special assistant U.S. attorney. Please welcome Mickey Carter.
Yeah!
And when they asked me to do this and told me Richard Jones was involved, I said yes, because when Rich asks for something, the answer is, how high do I need to jump to get over his bar? Rich serves as, when any executive vice president asks you that, but Rich in particular, serves as Executive Vice President, General Tax Counsel, Chief Veteran Officer for the CBS Corporation. As the company's General Tax Counsel, he oversees worldwide tax planning, strategy, operations, risk management, litigation, government relations, and legislative initiatives. But for the purposes of today, as the company's Chief Veteran Officer, Rich founded the CBS Veterans Network, oversees and coordinates all veteran military-related initiatives and programming for CBS. Rich is a veteran of the U.S. Army, serving honorably as a member of the 75th Ranger Regiment and the 10th Mountain Division. Go Fort Drum. Rich received his undergraduate law and business degrees from Syracuse University. He also has a master's of law from Boston University in both corporate and tax law. He and his wife, Robin, have 2 children. Rich, thank you again so much for having me a part of this day. All right. I'm hoping, and maybe, Mickey, we can start with you.
Sure.
Let's go down the row here and give me maybe a minute or two on that point in life when it came time to transition from the military to civilian life. The employment piece, how did that work?
Sure. So my path was probably a little stranger than most. I should probably start with, it was probably my father told me many years ago, said, son, kind of the key is to figure out what you're passionate about and then figure out how to get somebody to then pay you for it, right? So coming out of college, I knew that I was going to serve active duty. I was hoping that if I did well enough during law school that I could go JAG. That was a goal of mine. And but while I was in law school, I actually met a guy who was my law school roommate my 3rd year, and we got to be very close. And so he and I sat around saying, okay, assuming that we get out of law school and we pass the bar exam, like, what do you want to do? And for us, we had both expressed, media interest in sports and in music, and figuring out how to use our degree in that field. And so I had a fantastic experience, active duty, for a little over 3 years, most of the time at Fort Leonard Wood, affectionately known as Fort Lost in the Woods. Some of you all probably been there. So for me, finishing up my tour and then basically getting out meant that I was trying to figure out how to hustle and to get clients. So my first job coming out was a job that I just made up. This guy who was my law school roommate, he had gone to work at a law firm, cut his teeth a little bit, got training, and then we joined forces and we just started doing it. And so it was really me having courage to not feel like that I had to work for somebody else. It was me drawing upon, whatever confidence that my parents gave me, that my education gave me, and that my Army training gave me. That kind of transition wasn't something that I should fear, because I had the training and I had the passion. I just had to figure out how to get somebody to pay me for it, and it all kind of worked out.
And Mickey, when you were interviewing, did the JAG bullet point on your resume, how did that play?
So, I tell people all the time that I feel really fortunate. I'm blessed that I have 3 networks that are unbelievable: Harvard, Notre Dame, and U.S. military. Everywhere I've gone, somebody who has some sort of connection with one of those 3 networks or one of those 3 institutions has found me and said something about it, and it clearly has helped me stand out in every job interview that I've ever had. And I don't necessarily rank those. I would probably say Harvard has been great. I'd probably say Notre Dame, military, probably 1 and 2 neck and neck. Just to be honest with like this group about what's helped me. It's been those 2 networks. Harvard's been great. All of them have been great, but those 2 probably neck and neck.
You know, when you were, your last posting was in Germany, is that right?
That's correct.
So what was your process? You had been in the military for 6 years. Take us through how it worked in your head. I think I'm done, and I want to transition. I'm in Germany. I want a job in the States. How did it all work for you?
It's a very scary process.
I imagine.
I don't know if I had such a strategic plan. I was a new mom. My daughter was born in Germany, and my battalion was deploying. And I didn't know how I was going to do both. I was pregnant during when my first regiment deployed, and so I couldn't go, and I wanted to deploy. I felt like that was a part of being in the Army. And so I didn't understand how I was going to do both, and was battling with that.
Sure.
And I decided that I would leave the military. So I actually got out on a family care plan so that I could be with my family. And
Were there parts of that decision that were painful for you?
very painful, because the Army was a very rash decision that I had made. I had no plan to go into the Army. I woke up overnight, and I was just telling Nikki this story. I thought maybe one day in my mind I would dance on Broadway. So the Army was definitely not something that I had planned to do. But during my years in the Army, it was the absolute best decision that I've ever made. It set me up for so many things in life. And so I developed a family there. It was my life, and I absolutely love the Army.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, anybody who's raising kids know this. You try to give your kids the best advice about how to transition into real life for the rest of your life. And it's hard to understand, and sometimes it's hard for parents to understand, that there's some serendipity involved. Your life has been shaped by almost what you call a rash decision. As much as we try to get ahead of the process of finding the best fit for ourselves, your life was shaped by your time in the military, which was like a who knew.
Yeah.
So just give me, again, maybe another 30 seconds or a minute on how you then ended up back here in employment.
So I left the military, and I came back to New York only because this is where I was born and raised, and so I had someplace to live when I came back.
Did the military help on your resume?
I think the military was absolutely the thing that helped and got me anywhere on my resume, because the truth is, it was the biggest, probably the only thing on my resume. The experience that I had, almost 100% of it came from the military. So it was the thing that helped me.
Rich, you've heard these stories countless times, I'm sure. Anytime anyone spends any time with you, they know the meaning of the military. Can you take me, you've had an extraordinarily successful career in the private, or in the civilian sector, civilian employment, but how did your transition work?
Well, Jim, I think a lot of people may know my story, but everything about where I am is absolutely, and maybe it transcends. I mean, we have veterans, military-related individuals here. But we also have many colleagues here who may not have served in the military, and I think the experience is a universal one. And I would say that my life has been a series of very. I joined the military because my father died when I was a senior in high school, and I come from a military family, and so I'm the first person and my parents, hardworking people from upstate New York. So college was not something that was on the path, And so when my dad died, I had to go and help support the family. So I literally went down to the recruiting office, and my Marine friends, we talked about how it was literally 2 seconds. I would have, and I apologize that it was, the Marine, the Army recruiter got me. But it's been, that adversity. And again, the military was a great experience. And I served, started out as an E1. So again, the themes of starting from the bottom. I went in with literally the first flight that I took in my life was on Eastern Airlines to Atlanta, Georgia, and then a long bus ride to Fort Benning, Georgia, and literally with just whatever resources I had and open mind. And I think the themes around all of us experience that, some adversity, not knowing what's going to happen in life, and then just being open to possibilities. And so, even the recruiter, it was like, okay, how many push-ups can you do? How many pull-ups? Okay, you look like somebody who can do this, and that's really how it went. But the military was fantastic. I took advantage, I'm sure, Chanel and Mickey can say the same thing. The schooling, the training, the mentoring really developed me as a human being. And so I did that for 5 years. And then one night during a airfield seizure, my parachute malfunctioned, and I hit the runway and broke my neck and my back and my legs. And then I spent the next 9 months at Walter Reed Army Hospital. So again, adversity. And so my transition from the military was I had just re-enlisted for 6 more years. So the military was my career. So again, okay, the theme is, okay, here it is, what do you do? So I had a lot of time to think when I was at Walter Reed, and very fortunate to, again, I think a positive attitude about life, good doctors, et cetera. But then, fast forward, took a test at the VA about an occupational test. And among the things that it said that I was good at, because for the people who do know me, they know that I'm obsessive compulsive. So they said, among the things you might, accounting might be something you might be interested in. So I literally, based on that, and then it was just, okay, now I'll go to school and took advantage of educational opportunities. And so the themes around hard work, honesty, integrity, really the basics. I mean, I'm literally here, it's like that movie with William Hurt, The Accidental Tourist. They're things, I would just say that every person has them, right? It's how we're defined by how we deal with adversity, but it's every day. Listen, for folks who know me, I look like I'm, together, but I suffer every day with horrible, there's days where I can't walk. It takes me, 3-4 hours to be able to walk in the morning, right? But you just get up, you work hard, you treat people well, and it's a simple, and I think that's what my military experience informed me, and it's in terms of how I approach our practice, I'm very fortunate many of my colleagues are here. It's really just the basics, the things we're taught about decency, and so that's really, and I just say that because there's a lot of folks who are here who are not from a military background, but it's universal. I think, Mickey and Chanel, you can say the same thing. That, that's really the thing that and everybody has it, right? Everybody deals with it.
Rich, if you had not had the parachute malfunction, would you still be in the military?
Absolutely. General Votel, who is retiring after 40 years in the military, General Votel was one of my commanders. And I marvel at the fact that here's, a military commander who went into the military, I think graduated, was commissioned in 1979, but to still be in the military after 40 years and SOCOM commander, but that was I really enjoyed it, and but there's no doubt that I would still be in.
In listening to all three of your stories, I'm reminded of something you just can't say enough, which is thank you for your service. It is really very important. So, 16 years ago, I'm in the Iraqi desert. I'm with the 1st Brigade Combat Team of the 3rd Infantry Division, and I've never seen anything like this before. And a sandstorm blows in, and I mean, I can't see my hand in front of me. It is unbelievable. And I walk into the the TOC, the sort of command and control tent, and I see everybody just as busy as it, and I turned to the general, I'm like, what is going on here? He goes, we got a war to fight. I'm like, I know, but you can't see in front of you. He goes, it doesn't matter. And with the most intense efficiency that you could imagine in a workplace, they're continuing to prosecute the war. And at that moment, the epiphany over my head was, the thought bubble was, man, if I'm ever hiring, the first thing I want everyone in this room to come to work in my business. Because if they can handle this, there's nothing they can't handle. What did you find as you began to work, Mickey, let's start with you, in either the private sector or just civilian life? What did you find to be the most important attribute or skill that you had picked up from your time in the military that helped you establish a successful foundation in your new life?
So that is a really good question. I would say that the single biggest thing is probably leadership. There is, when you're in and you're serving and you're getting trained, certainly I didn't think about it very much, but it's probably one of the few jobs anyone can have where you get formal leadership training. We all probably have jobs, and I'm hoping that we, have less of this at CBS than other places, but we know people who are in leadership positions who aren't very good leaders. And that doesn't make them bad people, right? But, what I learned as I got older is that, wow, this training that I got is invaluable, because when you go to school, you get trained to be an accountant or a lawyer, or you get trained in HR, or you get trained in engineering. There's very little training on how to lead people, right? How to look at situations and to problem solve around people and circumstances and things and principles that you need to have when things are going crazy around you.
What are some of those? What are the fundamental components of good leadership?
So, I will say, and I got some people here who work with me probably will say that, I don't know you learned this as well as you think you did. But I will tell you that the number one thing that I learned is what I'll call servant leadership. And what I mean by that is, my first job, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant, and then while I was in law school, magically I made first lieutenant. And so my first job, I was thrown into a claims office, and I was leading a bunch of civilians, a bunch of enlisted people. Everybody knew how to do that job but me. I was the only cat who knew nothing about the job. And so what I quickly learned, and I, kind of fell back on some of my training and mentoring, was the path for you to be successful is to take care of all those people around you and to have them kind of train you. And so every person that I've ever hired and every boss that I've ever had, I always say the exact same thing. I always say, my job is to take care of you. Your job is to take care of me. And if we're both doing our job, then this is going to be fantastic, right? And so I've tried to stay focused on taking care of, best I can, anybody working with me, for me, around me. I have to think about people, right? There's always mission. There's always what we got to accomplish. My job is to get deals closed. So I have to close deals. The only way that I can close those deals for this company is to have a team of people with me who are all firing on all cylinders. And every now and then I've lost sight of it, and I've fallen short. But my job is to give everybody around me how I look at it, just from a leadership point of view. If I have to pick one thing, is that I've got to figure out how I can put everybody around me in the best position to win and to maximize whatever skills, talents they can bring to the table. And then also, best I can, try to figure out what's next. It's not always easy trying to figure out when you're in a big company how to help someone develop or what's next. We don't have the same sort of process and very neat, orderly way for people to go from E1 to E2 to E3 to eventually make sergeant. So it's different here. And so anyway,
The best, it's so evocative and resonant for me to hear you talk about that. The best leader I've ever seen in any setting was an infantry colonel by the name of Morris Goines. And he was the S3, a major at the time, during the invasion of Iraq. And I would walk with him across this sort of, this forward base. And I mean, this guy couldn't go 5 steps without getting peppered. And I heard questions from where the body bags to where the powdered eggs, and everything in between. And he would walk and he wouldn't stop. He would just turn and answer the questions and kept going. And I said, Mo, you must how do you handle this without breaking, without snapping, without, and he just looked at me and goes, comes with the parking space, brother. Comes with the parking space. And I just remember folding that into Mo kept me very safe. You'd have another moderator if I hadn't met Mo. But he always had a sense of, it comes with the parking space. That's leadership, right? Best leader you ran into during your time in the military. Can you describe her or him to me?
Best leader may have been a sergeant. His name was Sergeant Perry.
What made Sergeant Perry good?
I think Sergeant Perry, one, was a good leader because he had great characteristics. He was strong. He was a great listener.
2 ears, 1 mouth, use them accordingly. I learned that. I learned that from Mo. My children have grown up that way. That's real. I'm so glad you said that. Use them proportionately.
He was a great listener. He also understood that he didn't know everything, but we were going to get to the end goal together. While I was in the military, I had a soldier who passed away. His name was PFC Smalls, and I had just made sergeant at the time, so I had just become that leader. And we went through all the training, and but I wasn't prepared for a soldier to pass away, and it wasn't even military related. It was a car accident, and he passed away. And it was Sergeant Perry who said, "Okay, I've never dealt with this either, but we have the same end goal, and we're going to get through this together." And so I think that is what made him stand out and what made him amazing.
And that can be such a powerful thing for those under your leadership, is to say, hey, look, I don't know the specifics of exactly what's required to get to this end goal. I do know we're going to get there, and I do know we're going to figure it out, and I do know we're going to figure it out as a group. In your current life, interfacing with the folks you do at CBS, what would you point out as the quality that was fostered during your time in the military that makes you the most effective leader?
I think I'm adaptable. I was thinking about it sitting here listening to Mickey, and I think because of the military, I'm able to be in almost any situation and adapt and say, okay, I'm not comfortable in this situation, but this is how I'm going to get through it. Or I don't want to be in this situation, but I know this is where I need to be right now, or this is how I'm going to get out of it. So I think it's about being adaptable.
Rich, I've always, another tenet, man, my kids are so tired of hearing stuff I learned from the military, but another one we have in my house. Something must be bigger than you. I think when you're sizing up leaders, you can tell in about 7 seconds if there is something bigger than that person in that person's life, or if they're the biggest thing in that person's life. And by the way, those people I don't need to be in the same room with. You must have something bigger than you in your life to be an effective leader. Would you agree with that? And give me a sense of, you do a lot of leading right now. How is your philosophy as a leader grounded in your military experience?
Jim, that's a great question, and I will just say this, that I think that my view, and I think for folks who know me, I know that I mean, I start with literally having had, I'll just say a near-death experience, okay? It's always with me. I think that, one of the gifts that's come from that is that I realize the brevity. Even philosophically, I don't have a lot of time here, right? And so for me, it's never about money, right? But it's going to be, it's like Maya Angelou had said, that people will not, won't remember what you said to them, but they will absolutely remember how you made them feel. And the impact that all of us have, right, the ripple that will continue on through the universe is what did you do, to impact a person so that they can be impactful in life, right? In the Army, it was always about force multiplication, because you can't just be a team of one, right? We operated in teams, and we were trying to make sure that everyone was as proficient, right? We trained so that we can accomplish a greater mission. And I think this is something that all of us, again, I go back to, it's not just military, this is, especially in these times where, with smartphones and people who aren't necessarily, living up to their potential, right? So I think that the challenge is that the bigger things, the important things, the lasting things, the things that will determine whether, our, civilization, right, what is it going to be 100 years from now? And that starts with everybody making a decision on a daily basis to always do the right thing, to take the time to, be impactful in somebody's life, right? And so those are the big things, and there's a lot of them, but it starts with individual action every day and being fearless about it and having courage. And there's a high degree of selflessness that goes with that, because there's a lot of people who want, going to the topic of leadership, if people truly understood what leadership is, I would suggest that people would not want it, because the mantle is heavy, and you come last, right? Because if you're a good leader, you're giving all the time. And when you go home, you're crawling to the finish line, but it's all good, because you can put your head down on the pillow and know that you gave it your best.
My buddy Mo went, I think he had 4 tours. And in one of the tours, his unit suffered 41 deaths, 41 combat deaths. And I asked him, so what does that do to your sense of self and your psyche? He goes, man, I'm writing 41 cards every Mother's Day. Even long after, he was continuing to stay connected to those people and to their families. And I wondered about the toll on him to do something like that. He was with our family for my daughter's bat mitzvah, and there was a brunch the next morning, and we're in the kitchen in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And all of a sudden, somebody comes running in and says, you better get in the kitchen. And I walked in. Somebody had dropped a bunch of dishes. Now, Mo Goines is 6'4", 235. He's the toughest man I've ever met in my life. Someone dropped dishes. He was flat on the kitchen floor, and he was not in a great place. And I realized, you want to talk about what you give to the country? This was, years later. And the sound of the dishes sent him to the floor. Do you feel there are challenges from your time in the service? Not everybody has seen combat, but you've all seen that. It's life and death. That's the thing about when I found those guys who were prosecuting war in the talk in the middle of the sandstorm, I was like, my goodness, this is literally life and death stuff they're doing. Are there challenges that you have to this day that are grounded in that experience? Was there a part of your transition that didn't go smoothly because of the environment you were leaving to the one you were going to?
I can honestly say that I was fortunate. I was active duty during a time where things were pretty quiet. And so there was nothing that I can really point to, honestly. There was a definite transition, but it
What was that
nothing-
about? What was your transition? The challenge of your transition?
You know, this is not a real challenge, really, but probably thankfully, probably about the biggest challenge that I had was taking care of myself physically. It is probably, being in the military is probably the only job where you get formal leadership training, one of the few. It's also, I always tell people, the only job where I was paid to take care of my body. And I would, and the guy who was my partner, he was a guy who was a great athlete, college athlete, and we were in law school together, and he had gotten to the point where he was a little bit overweight, and I was on him a lot while I was active duty. I'm like, man, you gotta, like, you have to set aside time to take care of yourself. Schedule it like it's an appointment, And he was like, yeah. And so then I get out, and now we're partners. And now I have the same challenges he does day to day. And he was like, not so easy to schedule that time to work out, is it? It has been one of the things that has helped me try to, having that priority on thinking about my physical well-being, helping me deal with stress and like a bunch of other things, has helped me. So it was a challenge initially. It's something that like eventually has really helped me try to manage stress and try to stay just as healthy as I can.
Does your job, which I know must get stressful,
A little bit.
a little bit,
Especially now.
do you feel your sense of capacity, of what you can handle when you're in the thick of it now, is there some memory, institutional memory, or sense of what you can handle because of what you had to handle in the military?
This is probably true for many of us, but it goes back to boot camp, right? I mean,
How tough is boot camp for people who don't know?
Tough.
Yeah.
It is like an alternate universe in so many different ways, just because of the physical challenges, the psychological things going on, things that they're throwing at you. But it's just like an alternate universe, just because you are in a role that is very different even from serving, whether you're going to be an E1 or whatever. It's just like you are almost having an out-of-body experience every day. Like, is this really happening? Like, did he or she really say that to us? And what are they asking us to do? And so coming out of that experience, I was at Fort Bragg, and there were bugs. I was just saying that I saw bugs. It was like tarantulas mated with praying mantis, and it's just hot. It was steamy. It was difficult. But I learned that I can do anything for a limited period of time, right? Like that was my boot camp mindset. Like, it doesn't matter what these guys throw at me. I have to get to this day so that I don't get recycled. I can't sprain an ankle. I've just got to do whatever I've got to do, because I can do anything for a limited period of time. And just in the last couple days, someone came in who was in the thick of it on a deal that I'm not primary on, and she sat down and said, Mick, this is tough. And I said, you got to tell yourself, I went back to boot camp, I said, you can do anything for a limited period of time, right? And what I also said, and I learned this about boot camp also, is that if you just focus upon outcome, then it's going to be harder. Like, I had to find some joy in the process as well. And that's been so true for everything that I do here. Deals can be, Sam is in the room, one of my colleagues. We can go round the clock for days and days talking about contracts, which doesn't sound real exciting. But, that is a grind. When you don't have sleep, anybody have any memories of this? You don't have sleep, haven't eaten properly, conditions aren't good, haven't seen your family, worried about stuff at home. Those are conditions that that are that are certainly similar to what many people's military experience is. And what helps me to get through it is trying to have fun, right? And not just focusing upon outcome, but on process. There are things that I can learn from these people around me. There are ways that I can uplift somebody else. They can help me when I'm down. And so if there's anything that I would point to, it would be boot camp. And I can do anything for a limited period of time. And you know what? Process. Let me find some joy in the process, and that can get me through almost anything.
If there is a takeaway, or among the many takeaways from this hour of conversation, focus on process, not on outcome, is, to me, I mean, that's just a life lesson right there. Plus, if you focus on process, the outcome's going to be better than if you had just focused on that to begin with.
Absolutely.
Chanel, the question about challenge in transition. So what was your biggest hurdle? What had you found to be, because of the 6 years of being steeped in a certain way of living, maybe not all of it translated to this civilian life? What was the biggest hurdle for you?
I think my biggest challenge may have been the people. In the military, you create and you join this family, and everyone has this like goal and like mind, and you all are doing the same thing, different jobs, but in the same family, this Army family. When I transitioned, it was a lot of competition. It was who's better than who, and who's going to get that, and who's going to do that. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge for me, having to, be a part of this competition and not necessarily a part of this family.
Had you found the regimented life, there's rules, they're laid out, they're clear as can be. And I've heard a lot of folks, active duty and then later veterans, say, I love that. I actually loved knowing exactly what the rules are, because, I mean, you get in the elevator in civilian life and it's not always so clear cut, right? So did you find yourself having to sort of get into a different head in terms of, because not everybody is aware of the rules?
It was a lot of structure in the Army, a lot of structure in the military, and in the civilian world, you're right, it's not as structured. It's not as many rules, or there may be rules and not everyone is following them. In the military, probably 99% of the people are following the rules, and that 1% that aren't following the rules, they're being disciplined for it. In the civilian world, we're all over the place,
Sometimes encouraged. Sometimes encouraged.
Yeah.
So, you don't have that structure, and you may not have a rule that follows, something may not be as strict as it was in the military. So that was also a learning experience for me.
Rich, was it an adjustment for you to start dealing with people who weren't as clear on the concept of following rules?
And it's a good point, because it's something, that Mickey started off with, which is really about leadership. And I would say that there's a misunderstanding. I think the best leaders in the military, yes, we have to, right? It's, you will follow orders, right? It's a requirement to the military experience. But the best leaders are the ones who are motivating you, right? Leaders are supposed to inspire and motivate to accomplish the mission. So I think that there was certainly the issue of, you're not barking out orders, but really there's a nuance to it, which is, when you're working with people and to explain to them, here's the mission, right? We've got to accomplish it. Now let's figure out how we do it, right? It's not like, okay, here's the deal. This is your job and this is your job, and I think that happens. I mean, there are people who have that mindset, but I think that
There's more ownership when you allow them.
Yeah, and believe me, in the unit that I was in, that was it was very Spartan, but I always chafed at being dressed down. And I think when you're asking about different leadership styles, the ones that resonated with me were those people who appealed to those broader ideas and gave, within that experience, the encouragement to say, okay, I'm going to do this, why don't you do that? And the nuance around encouraging people to accomplish the mission versus, dictating. And I think I think what I've learned, and it's still a learning process, but it's you get the best out of people, and they are at their best when they feel that you're working with them instead of
And
dictating.
empowering them to feel
Piggyback
ownership.
that real
Yeah.
quickly. That's absolutely one of the best pieces of advice that I got as a very young officer. I was still in my JAG school, so I hadn't even gone out to my first unit yet. And a guy pulled me aside. He happened to be another African-American JAG officer. He was a light colonel, and I was the only African-American JAG in the class. And so he happened to be at the JAG school, and someone set it up for us to meet, and he gave me some words of wisdom. And one of the things that he said to me was, he said, true leadership isn't you being able to get people to do what you want them to do, because just by virtue of what's on your uniform, that'll happen. True leadership is basically getting people to want to do what you want them to do. And that's what Rich was speaking to when I was hearing him talk. It's when you have that kind of interaction, just barking out orders, whether it's in the military or it's in the civilian sector, okay, they'll do it, but are you really getting, are you really able to really maximize what your team could do versus having a conversation, getting some feedback, having that be a two-way street. And that piece of advice has always stuck with me, getting people to want to do what you want them to do. That's harder because it takes more conversation. It isn't just about look here or look here and do it. It's about having some interaction.
And ultimately, it's maybe harder, but it's also more effective and sustainable and effective.
That's right. You're building a stronger team that way. You'll be better and they'll be better, having had that kind of interaction.
So the dirty little secret of these panels is always that the best questions are always in the audience, and no matter how much I try, not here. So I want to get to your questions in just a second. Before we do that, I just want to go down quickly, the lightning round. And Mickey, you were just talking about the best advice you got. I would like each one of you to give some advice to people who are navigating and negotiating a corporation like CBS in terms of what you've learned in terms of thriving. Mickey, let's start with you.
I would say, and one of the things that I was thinking about, just hearing about kind of transitions and just thinking about how to navigate different environments, one of the things that can short circuit all of that is we have a lot of people in here, I'm sure high speed, low drag, but there's nothing wrong with figuring out how to kind of take some shortcuts with certain things. And one of the things is you don't have to figure out all of this on your own. It's helpful, especially in the corporate environment, if you can find someone who can be a good mentor, because that person will have navigated a lot of that same path. And you don't always have to bump your head. There's no badge of honor for having bumped your head and then come out on the other side. That's one approach. But if you're able to find someone who can take an interest in you, maybe there's a common affinity, whether it's military, whether it's you're from the same hometown, find someone who has done it and have them help you understand how to do it. And part of it may just be somebody you can ask questions that you may not feel comfortable asking among the people who are in your immediate group. That can be an invaluable resource. So don't be afraid to seek out people. You'll be shocked. People are really busy, but if you tell them that you would love to establish that kind of relationship, then you may be surprised. And don't be discouraged if you don't get your first choice. Just keep doing it, because there's somebody out there who can help you guys navigate some of these waters.
All right, find a mentor. Chanel, what do you got for us?
Understand that you don't have to know everything, and I think it's kind of piggybacking on what Mickey is saying, find a mentor, but understanding that everything is not about what you know. Find those strengths and the other people around you and use them.
Excellent advice. Excellent. Rich?
It may be an old-fashioned concept, but I think the most important thing is we're professionals, right? We work within a professional setting. Always be professional. The highest character, the highest integrity. Mickey said it best. You may get away with shortcuts. You may not get caught, but you're going to know that you did it, and so don't. And just being the best professional you can be. That embodies a lot of things. And then in this world that we live in, it's continuing. I mean, it's revolutionary change, right, in terms of everyone's career, the industry, and the thing that will give you courage, because it's we all live with uncertainty, right? What's tomorrow going to bring? And probably no more so in the case of this company, in this industry. But the thing that you have control over is being the best professional you can be. And that means in the way that you deal with others, the way that you give yourself the gift of time, right? Don't be a reactive person every day. Doesn't mean you have to read 7 to 10 newspapers a day, but be informed, continual education, formal and informal. And you're going to make yourself better. You're going to make your workplace better. And I would suggest, there's a whole other topic we can go on. I'm also known as Dr. Doom. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll understand what I mean. But it'll make the country and our world better.
Fantastic. It's really wonderful advice, and I thank you all three for that. Let's turn it over. I'm sure there must be some questions in the audience. Do we have a mic? Is that what we're doing? Fantastic. Good to know the TV corporation has microphones. Who's got a question first? Anybody out there? Okay. You want to let's start right here.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. Thank you for being here today. I have two questions. One is about the media depiction of the military and thinking about being close to home. CBS shows, JAG, NCIS. TV has to wrap it up in 44 minutes. I just wondered if you could talk about how you feel when you watch those shows. And my second question is, could you talk about the lessons from the military that founded your career that includes diversity and inclusion, and how that's expressed in private sector?
Great questions. You want to start?
Yeah, I'll talk about the diversity. When I was in the military, it was in the days when we had the don't ask, don't tell, right? And so I'll start with that because I did have a neighbor. I was living in the barracks. I was in private at the time, and I had a neighbor who was gay. And one day they came in one morning, 4 o'clock in the morning with the dogs, and they were doing room inspections. And he had a picture of, I'm assuming I didn't see the picture, but rumor was it was he and his partner in the inside of his locker, his private picture, his private business. And in 2 weeks, he was out of the military. And so for me, I knew him as my neighbor in the barracks. He lived across the hall from me. I thought about, we're not reflective at that time of everyone, and we're not operating in a diverse environment. So when I come into the civilian sector, especially here at CBS, I look at us, and just looking at this panel alone, I see diversity, and it's embraced, and I love it, and I am so passionate about it. So does that kind of help you with how the diversity plays across the military? And I think we are getting, like the civilian sector as well, I think we've made major strides, but I think in the military as well, they're making major strides to be more diverse and inclusive. I think it's all a work in process.
Mickey, what do you think about the depiction of the military as you see?
So, when I was a little boy, I used to be a Brady Bunch devotee. And so when we had a problem in our family, I would say to my mother quite often, but Mom, in the Brady Bunch, they did it this way. And she would say to me, son, in the real world, family problems can't be handled in 30 minutes, right? So I figured out that was just entertainment, and that's kind of how I view most of the shows. Now I know that, I am cognizant, though, of the fact that for many who haven't had that experience, that's their window into what it's like, right? And so, I can't tell you, having been JAG, how many conversations I've had, either about A Few Good Men or the CBS TV show, and I had to tell them, I said, you know what, I've had opportunities to do lots of cool things one-off kind of cool things, but I don't know how to fly a helicopter. I can't drive a tank and, name some other stuff, So it's just not realistic, and I've had those conversations, and, but at the same time, it made me look really cool in a lot of people's minds that we had this show and they thought that I was that guy.
Some shows do get basic training right. It's very hard.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, though, can I ask you both?
Yes.
I'm putting together for Sunday Morning right now a piece about Woodstock, so 50 years since Woodstock. And the context, of course, was the Vietnam War was unfolding, and there was the unfortunate reality for so many of the members of the military who came home from the Vietnam War and were treated in a horrendous fashion. In the last 50 years, or at least in the last 20, you've had Afghanistan and Iraq. We've had all of these wounded warriors. It's not hard to go to the mall and see somebody that has paid a price. Do you all feel a difference in how you are received as veterans, or how veterans are received now than 50 years ago when the Vietnam vets were coming home?
Absolutely. I think veterans now, we are a part of the diversity conversation. So I think absolutely we're received differently. I think, we are wanted and welcomed in the workplace. From my point of view, I absolutely think we are perceived differently.
I will say that I was in ROTC in college in the mid-'80s. I had at least, certainly kind of the worst experience. And this was still when we're coming out of the baby killer era from Vietnam. And I had one experience where campus security had to get involved. I was wearing my BDUs back from a ROTC training session, and a guy out on the street walking from MIT back to Harvard, a guy just was following me. And yelling crazy things. He followed me all the way down Central Avenue back into my dorm area, came in the dorm. I didn't have an altercation with him, wasn't gonna pick a fight with the guy. He probably had some mental illness, but his frame of reference was seeing a military uniform baby killer. I actually think that we're probably past that. I think people wearing furs now probably have it much worse out on the street than I do wearing my battle dress uniform. But I think it's a function of where you are in this country too, and what groups. I think there's a certain amount of value in it when you have family members and loved ones and people who are connected versus not. And I think during that era, it was much more common for more families to have that connection than happens today.
And the draft probably made a wider swath of our culture was involved. Rich, I see you sort of really, this is an issue that obviously has a great deal of meaning to you.
Well, I will say on the topic of, I will say this because I take personal ownership over this. It doesn't always work, but it's supposed to work that every script that involves some controversy around veteran matters, I get involved in it, and to make sure from a quality control perspective. So it doesn't always work because it's a creative process. But for instance, SEAL team, there was an episode where one of the SEALs committed suicide at the VA, at a VA hospital. And again, to the point of you cannot, the danger with, especially when you're dealing with sensitive topics, it's one thing if you're going to depict and the show, the code, which I think was more about not adhering to, if you're going to depict the Marine Corps, you better make sure that you look like a Marine, you act like a Marine. So that was a whole other thing. It was canceled yesterday, sadly. But if you're going to depict serious things that can trigger something within a viewer, I think we need to be very cognizant of that. And so we made sure when we found out about it that we put a warning, right, that this is that this doesn't depict because anybody who works with the veteran community knows that there are no easy answers. Okay, the work that I do, you'll find people who it's like Humpty Dumpty. You can try to put Humpty Dumpty back together, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And they have the best support, but if a person gets hooked on pain pills and then decides to self-medicate and isolate, it's very, very difficult. And that doesn't mean that the VA is necessarily bad in those cases. I mean, it's a difficult job to take people who have been physically or emotionally injured and to help them reacclimate, especially, and this goes to the point of the difference. If you look at the experiences of World War II veterans or Vietnam veterans, Korean War veterans, they're relatively young people who did 1 year, 2 years, and then after their draft commitment was up, they came back to communities where that service and sacrifice was appreciated, and there was at least the warmth of a family, and at a minimum, there was an American Legion Hall or a VFW hall that was down the road, and that was sort of how people were able to deal with their experience, which was my family. But today, because we don't have the draft, and because it's 1% of the population, that is, we're 330 million people in this country, and we've got about a 3 million force, right? And then, so about 1%. And we've got about 7% of the population, which are veterans. We have 22.5, 23 million living veterans. But the experience, where they come from, if you look at who those people are, it's essentially, it's a family business in many cases, right? And so the experience of it as part of the experience of being a citizen is not shared and not understood. And I think, you made the point about perhaps a little bit of isolation or not understanding. That's a part of it. The other part is that the age that people, you find that people get out a little bit later, so it's harder. So when you get out after doing 4 years, and then perhaps you can take educational benefits, but many times, right, you come out, you've got a family. Day one, you've got to put a roof over somebody's head, you've got to put food on the table, and you've got to hit the ground running. So the challenges of the modern veteran are very difficult. And I think even educationally, the World War II generation, even the Vietnam generation, were able to take advantage of the GI Bill, and that meant something. A college degree at that time was a ticket to something. Today, because of the changing nature of what education is relative to the skills that are required in jobs, there's a big disconnect, and that leads to a lot of disillusionment, a lot of disconnect. So there's still a lot of issues, but the good news is that's why, a plug for the CBS Veterans Network and the work that we do is to try to make sure that we can bridge those gaps, right? And all the work that Mickey does in his personal time, and Chanel, and every veteran who's here, and the good work and passion that so many of you have. That's the difference that we can make, is to take the time to mentoring, giving honest feedback about what educational path to take. I'm a very practical guy. I mean, obviously I went into accounting, went into the law, but I'm all about, I want a job that's, and I think, it's good to have something that enriches your life, but you should be passionate, but get a paycheck, and then you can branch out from there.
So we have, I think, time for one more, and I saw your hand was up, so we can bring the microphone over there, and at least one more.
Hi, I'm Shay. Thank you again for the panel today. My question is a personal question, actually, because my best friend is leaving for the Navy on Saturday. She's going into Intel. I'm really excited. But my question is, what do I do to support her through the next couple of years?
Terrific question. That's great. Well, Mickey, let's start with, or Chanel, you want to start?
How can you support her?
What do you remember from your time that was most helpful in terms of support from friends, family?
So I have a trunk at home. It's a very small trunk, and it's filled with stuff, old stuff and things that I remember. And my grandmother passed away December of 2017. And I was going through my trunk, because every once in a while I kind of cleaned it out or put something else in it. And there's a postcard from her while I was in basic training that she had sent me. So send those postcards,
That's wonderful.
write those letters, and attend the graduation if you can, because it means a lot at the end.
I will say that I was hesitant to start only because I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm about 150 years old. And that the means of communicating with someone have changed dramatically. And I am out of touch with kind of the ways in the modern military that service members have touch points with their friends and their family members. So just to piggyback that,
different?
whether it's a postcard or whatever it is, having those points of connection, especially when you know that they're going through an especially difficult time, whether it's at the beginning and you've got that transition, or whether it's some sort of training that they've got that's going to be particularly difficult. Those are the times, just like any other circumstance, where having people who love you tell you so means a lot.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what not to do. My grandmother sent a ham.
He said no cookies.
There's no joke. My grandmother sent a ham, and in those days it was mail call. So my grandmother sends a ham, and the drill sergeant said, "Jones, come up here." And who sent you this?
Ham.
And so it's from my grandmother, drill sergeant. And okay, good. And so there was nothing else said about it until the next morning. Before, this was like 3:30 in the morning. I had to eat the whole ham before we did PT.
Oh!
Oh my God.
And so
ham.
don't send a ham.
No ham.
Hilarious.
So with that, I think Betty's going to give me the hook here. But before we go, because we're kind of wrapped up, I just want to say thank you all very much for sharing your time, your insight. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.